It's great to have Lucy here thinking, I think we're about to move into an era where, a bit like the Home Office has a crime bill every year, we will have a digital regulation bill of some sort every year. We've got a queue at DCMS already around digital competition, around another data protection regulation, for example, and I am optimistic that we might, in the next couple of years, although we're not complacent, have a change of government and accessing Lucy's thinking around things like algorithmic regulation, around what an incoming Labour government's view might be around these issues, is what Anna is going to now explore with Lucy Powell. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you so much, Lucy, for coming here on a day that I know is particularly busy. We've watched Jim run to and forward from Westminster all day. You're now Shadow Secretary of State for DCMS, and I think it's been described as the Department for Everyday Life. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us something about your personal journey to this role, which is now leading Labour's technology policy?
Sure, yeah. Well, thank you for having me here today. It's great. I do like to see all those pictures on the wall on the way in, just by the way, obviously because we're in the Engineering and Technology Institute, so of course it could only possibly be a long picture of men, with the one exception of your founder, one of your founders here. But as somebody with a science degree and who did STEM at A-levels and university, I do feel slightly concerned if that's still the case. We still have this sort of long line of men in these things. So yes, I'm going to try and bring some of my STEM background into my DCMS role. But yeah, when you get given the Secretary of State for DCMS role, everyone texts you and says, right, great, Minister of Tickets, Ministry of Fun, can we sort of all this sort of thing. But actually, as you say, it is a massive economic powerhouse now. The sectors that are under DCMS, from telecoms to infrastructure, digital, creative industries, sport, leisure, everything. It's nearly a quarter of the whole economy. And Michelle Donnellan, which I completely agree with her on this, the new Secretary of State, she describes it as the department of all the future jobs. And I think she's onto something there. So yeah, I mean, when I was first sort of given the job, I wasn't, quite sure why I was given the job, because you never are, because you get, that's the thing with politics, you get really into the job you're doing. And I was previously doing the housing brief, albeit quite briefly. And I was happy doing that. And then you get a phone call that you're getting moved. So our job is not to try and be the expert in all things future of work or all things digital. I take all that expertise from other people in the room. Our job is to try and navigate some of those political policy dilemmas and questions and look to the future and try and make sure that we get some of the politics of that right and some of the policy framework, and that's my job. So I feel I'm capable of doing that job, but yeah. I'm not a digital whiz or anything.
More than.
But I have, as I say, in another life, I could have maybe got myself on the wall on the outside of here somewhere, but I chose a different path after university.
Well, in a way, it's a role that spans the topics of this conference too. So it's the digitisation of work and society, and also well-being across the country. So as well as your huge capabilities, we would all be interested, I think, to know in your sort of passions within that huge remit.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and there, this morning I was doing a big speech at the Advertising Association annual conference in Leicester Square to an audience of sort of 400, obviously in the leading kind of creative industry. So I think the two big areas in the DCMS portfolio are really the digital economy and all things that flow from that, and the sort of creative economy, and of course those two things overlap as well. And I think as a parent as well, I mean, I've got teenage children, so I think any parent, the conversation that parents are having these days, how do we keep our children not just safe online, but sort of digitally literate, able to navigate the good from the bad, from the things that they are being pushed, and knowing that they're having them pushed onto them, whether they're adverts or or bits of fun, as well as them being sort of dangerous thing. I think this is something that we all as parents are struggling to navigate. I do put strict screen times on and all of that kind of thing, so I'm like misery mum as far as my kids are concerned. So I think there's that whole sort of challenge, but then of course the future of work, and every job, every business is going to be digital in the next few years if it's not already. Maybe not fully digital, but certainly quite a considerable part of that digital, and I think that's a massive sort of transition that we're going to go through as a country, and has lots of challenges in it as well, because we do have a big digital divide, don't we, in terms of not just accessibility but affordability and digital sort of literacy. That's a challenge. Who are the winners? Who are the losers? How do we put some of these things to better public good, whether that's data sharing, data and digital? How do we, digital will be a big part of dealing with the big challenges the country faces, from net zero to public health and public service reform. So these are big questions that actually, as politicians, they're the sort of things that we like to try and get our teeth into a bit more. So I think that's...
Yeah, that's such a wide range of things. What do you think what do you personally think are some of the biggest challenges and also opportunities for technology in your department in particular?
Well, that's a big question. Loads of things, and I think part of it is not about trying to sort of pick winners necessarily, but obviously creating that context and that framework. And Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves talk about this quite a lot, and Ed Miliband in relation to sort of net zero, and myself in relation to sort of some of the things that fall within my brief, whether that's AI or quantum computing or something. But there's a massive global race going on at the moment for the to have the sort of technologies of the future, both for the job security of the future and the economy of the future, but also for the national security issues of the future. We're seeing a sort of post-COVID and in post-Ukraine, and what's happening in Russia and China and everything, countries now recognising that they need to have be able to have these technologies themselves and deploy them themselves, and not be relying on other countries to do that. So there's this huge global race going on in these technologies. Some countries are going to win that race and some countries aren't. And I think the UK we've always been kind of world leading when it comes to some scientific endeavour and technological change, things like AI, things like quantum computing, and so on. We've always been kind of good at our kind of inventing these things. What we've been less good at is gaining the benefits of that and really adopting that, and then and getting the benefits of that. So we invented the silicon chip, but we don't own Silicon Valley. We don't house Silicon Valley, and I think that's the sort of story of Britain, isn't it, over many decades. And I think an incoming Labour government wants to be sure that we can both develop the technologies, but we have the context and the climate here for those inventions to really be more widely adopted and get the productive value of that as well.
Yeah. So we have a long history in science, technology, academia, law as well. Mm-hmm. But there isn't a UK Apple, and also we're one of the most unequal countries compared to sort of OECD peers, which has seen very sharply at work. So picking up perhaps a question from the previous panel, in a sense, the sort of perhaps the biggest challenge, or one of the biggest challenges, is how can we encourage technology, responsible technology that drives shared prosperity, and where benefits are shared with as many people as possible, and perhaps also augments people, sort of augments capabilities and brings out the best of everybody, rather than simply thinking of substitution. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. Look, I mean, obviously the digital age was supposed to be, in many ways, as I was sort of growing up and the World Wide Web was coming on stream. I'm that old, as I was at sort of university, we were only just getting on the internet when I was sort of getting on university. But the digital age was meant to be this great leveller that everybody had access to all knowledge all the time. We could communicate with anybody whenever we wanted, and that this would somehow kind of create a flatter world rather than a sort of spiky or more unequal world. But I think what we're actually seeing is those gaps have become wider, not narrower, because for many reasons, I think, partly because those who have the data, the platforms, the sort of who are at the vanguard of some of the technology have then been able to sort of monopolise that a bit more and see off competition, and maybe some of the smaller players. It's harder for small business to get into these issues around literacy and competency and confidence in using technologies, and embedding that across society. And we've got to do more around that in terms of skills and education and giving people the confidence, and supporting businesses with their workforce as well, and seeing those opportunities. And then there's sort of geographical inequalities that are, I say this as a Manchester MP and a proud sort of Mancunian, but we've still got a deeply regional I think we talk about that at the end of the last session as well, in this country, and we have seen more of the advances that we are making in the sort of digital tech and digital sectors, exacerbating that further instead of levelling that out more. And I think Gordon Brown's done a big piece of work for us on the future of the UK, where digital technology and digital clusters were kind of a part of his narrative. We've had Lord Jim O'Neill has done a big review for us on becoming the best place to start a business and startups and getting some of that investment. We don't have a great investment culture still in this country, certainly not outside of London. It's very hard to access finance. So we've got a whole kind of array of pieces of work that we've been doing. David Blunkett's done a big piece of work on skills for us, which of course is around digital skills and creative skills as well, which I know a lot of people do. So it's not just in my brief, but this is part of a kind of a real agenda that we've got for a national renewal of Britain, and having the best place to really not just start a business, but grow a business and have a business here. So we need a good kind of array of policies across the piece.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And in a sense, a technology policy, the policy you're leading on, has huge potential to help pull together some of those threads.
Exactly.
Maximise those opportunities and address those risks.
Definitely. And a bit of new news for you. We're working on a green paper on the digital economy that will be out in the spring, that will draw on all of those elements, from skills to infrastructure, to making sure we've got a good regulatory framework that's not just a regulation from the point of view of stopping people doing things, but also giving people the certainty and the confidence and the long-term regulatory regime to enable these things to flourish, as well as looking at some of the public service reform and net zero opportunities that digital brings. So that's Labour's going to be sort of really trying to occupy that space in the coming months.
That's fantastic news. Just in terms of the sort of DCMS growth and also approach to regulation, because it's happening so fast, and regulation often feels a bit behind.
Totally.
It's taken so long to get the online safety bill to where it is now, and we need to look beyond that. Do you think, in thinking about approaches to regulation and the way you might look at it in your own green paper, do you envisage shifts in that? Perhaps more to future oriented approaches, where that goals or targets or principles are set with some red lines, and then details and guidance are worked up over time.
Yes, well, hopefully, yes. And you're absolutely right. I mean, look, the online safety bill, and it is a landmark bill, and it is an important bill. Jim's now going to be leading on that for Labour in the Lords, and that, don't envy you that job, Jim. But we've just done months and months of it in the Commons, and as you say, the first draft of that bill that we saw, this is how fast things move or how slow sort of policy making moves. When we very first saw that draft bill, TikTok wasn't even around, you know, and now TikTok is the main way that my kids get their news. Well, my daughter actually, my son's probably YouTube and sort of football news, but you know, they're each to their own. But that's how, as you say, how quickly things move and how slowly government legislation and government sort of policy moves and reacts. So we recognise, I think, across the House of Commons, we you know, and politicians across the piece, we recognise that we've got some way to go to sort of catch up. I think where we get caught short, I think you're absolutely right about that, is to try and, you know, cross every T and dot every I, instead of giving regulators the broad remits and the tools and the powers that they need to look at those remits, and that then they're able to sort of adapt and change that over time, which I think, you know, we're pretty good at regulation in this country, actually. We're not overbearing regulators. We do have some good and notably good sort of regulators in this country. So I think we're able to do that. So that should be the approach that we take. But obviously the watering down that the online safety bill suffered right at the last minute, which I'm hoping Jim and his colleagues will now strengthen again, was a massive missed opportunity. Because to water something down that's gone through that many processes and gone through that much time, where there's that much agreement on it, just at the wrong moment in time, just as sort of Andrew Tate's being arrested, you know, you're kind of watering, he's not in scope at all, you know, now, basically, or any of that whole world.
So, so looking at that, looking beyond that, I'm beginning to imagine a DCMS that's more like the Home Office with a cross-cutting role, you know, initiating, you know, wider remits of regulation across the board, and bringing other departments and perhaps other MPs with you. Is that something you can imagine happening?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, you know, look, I think one advantage you have in opposition, you don't have many. In fact, it's pretty rubbish being in opposition, to be honest. I think, I don't know who was it who said that 1,000 days in opposition, you know, are not worth one day in government. I think that's probably fairly true to say. But one of the advantages we do have is we aren't hampered really by kind of working very closely with colleagues on big policy areas, because we haven't got whole departments sort of stopping you or impeding that, or you know, people aren't empire building quite so much as maybe they do when they get their feet under the department table. So that is an approach we want to take straight into government, touch wood, should we get there, and I think there's still a long way to go for us in that. But we can and we are working very much sort of across the piece here, and I think it's for the DCMS department to lead that process and lead the way. You know, Keir Starmer talks about it all the time, and he really is so committed to this. He really personally believes it, that he sees the role of government to sort of set the mission, and then you then work in partnership with business, with stakeholders, with trade unions, with others, to then work out how you're going to meet that mission, rather than just coming along with yet another piece of legislation that nobody wants along the way. Try and not be too overreactive.
Thinking about that last point and working with people and collaborating and I suppose consulting with academia or industry and so on. How do you think we're doing in the UK at that? And can we do better?
Well, I don't think, I mean, without making a sort of, you know, I don't like to use these moments to be sort of overly party political, but I think we've got rubbish at that recently. You know, and that's partly, I think, as a result of just having such uncertain government, full stop. You know, when you've got the huge sort of revolving door of ministers, prime ministers and everything else, it's very hard for people to engage with that. You know, it's just a statement of fact, really, isn't it? It's not really a party political point that much, but so we've not had that sort of stability that I think people need to make that much harder. But in the past, I think we've been good at that, and we should be better at that. I think some of these issues, whether it's like industrial strategy, which, I'm talking about a digital industrial strategy in a sense, and Johnny Reynolds has been developing our industrial strategy, but there's lots of crossover there in terms of data and AI and some of these things as well. These things should withstand ministers. They should even withstand a change of which party is in government. That's successful countries that win these global races have cross-party agreement about a kind of industrial or a digital industrial strategy that then withstands, because I'm sure most people in this audience recognise that you're making decisions for 10, 15 years as a business, or in scientific research you're not making decisions which politics often feels it is for the next day's headlines or the next week's news, and those two things can be quite colliding.
And to bridge thinking about immediate crises with long-term planning, which is what we really need to do.
Yeah, and as I say, I think with the huge transitions that we're seeing in the global economy at the moment, what America are doing with their Inflation Reduction Act, massive sort of investment in renewable energies, how the world has had to change its energy supplies and all these things, and then the massive digital transition that we're seeing. We'll either win some of that or we won't. That is the question, and at the moment it feels to me like we're not in the winning position we could be in, given that we actually have a lot of the technologies and the ideas and the people here to sort of make that a reality.
We've got some questions, and they've been fantastic through the day, that I think are going to come up on the screen and also go live. But as we get those up, it would be really good to leap back to the topic of this conference and work. So in thinking about all those things that you've said, what's the role of work here? How can thinking about work, or prioritising thinking about work and doing so more, and well-being more sharply, help us really bottom out some of these challenges and opportunities and get that bridge?
Yeah, well, and obviously I think workers have to be sort of central to that, and what we think about what work is, and how we can better balance our lives and these kind of conversations. Obviously Angela Rayner has been leading some of that work for us as well, and she's done a green paper on employment rights and things. But I think it's part of that is about changing some of that narrative, as you say, that these are not just sort of threats but opportunities. But we've got to give people the confidence to make that leap in many ways. And I think there's some good work being done out there. But we are talking about lifelong training, aren't we? Lifelong skill acquisitions and changing the very nature of the way we work. And these are not small things to happen. People have to be given confidence to do that and understand the journey that they're going on, why they're going on it, and to what benefit it could bring them.
Yes, it sounds like one of the questions up there is a natural sequel to that. How can we get large firms to help close the skills and education gap between our failing education system and jobs available, not just now, but in the future?
Yeah, well, I mean, it absolutely is the sort of right question to ask. One of the policies that we've already announced, which I think sort of helps in that regard, is around the apprenticeship levy. We want to reform the apprenticeship levy to make it more flexible for larger firms to use their apprenticeship levy, and to be able to use it for some of their contractors and sort of smaller firms as well, so that can be used for the current workforce as well as bringing on the new workforce. But we have to look at that from cradle to grave essentially as well. And one of the areas that I've been discussing with our shadow education team quite a lot is around the digital and creative skills in schools and beyond, which I think leaves something to be desired, because if automation is going to do more and more of the menial tasks, then of course what the humans are bringing to the table is their creativity, is their ingenuity, is their ability to adapt and learn. And I'm not sure our education system sort of reflects those sort of needs of the future economy at the moment. And you know, I think we're not going to be sort of embarking on kind of big announcement about curriculum change ahead of an election, but we are going to have to look at that when in government and taking people on that journey with us, both in terms of creative skills, digital skills as well, and making sure that we're producing the workforce of the future. But of course, I'm sure you've been talking about it, you know, most of the future digital jobs that we're talking about are going to be done by the current workforce, not by the future workforce. And that's a big transition that government cannot address on its own. That has got to be done in partnership with business.
And I can't resist one supplementary, that have we got the right balance between investment not just in capital, in the technologies, but also in the humans?
Well, yeah, I mean, big question, slightly above my pay grade, because they're probably the shadow treasury team, and I'm sure you know that Rachel Reeves runs our sort of financial and budget commitments with an absolute sort of iron fist. Rightly so. So, you know, I would get into lots of trouble if I sort of made any unfunded spending commitments. But certainly, when it comes, I mean, I think you can see the direction of travel when it comes to things like sort of business rates and other business incentives. What is it that we're incentivising and why? And is that about investing in productivity and workforce, or are we incentivising sometimes the wrong kind of behaviour from business? And I think these are the sort of big questions that Rachel and her team are looking at in terms of that sort of tax system, if you like.
And where it connects with you, I suppose, how can we incentivise good forms of automation?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
It almost sounds as if you read the next question about production. If we should keep the productive value of our inventions, does Labour policy reflect more of a Marianne Mazzucati view of industrial strategy than Van Reenen? We have Van Reenen in the room, so we might say free.
Yes. Maybe I'll gen up on that one. But yes, I mean, look, I without getting into a sort of theoretical sort of debate between their different views on that. I mean, look, I think it's definitely been a challenge for our country, hasn't it? As I said before, and I think it's one that we all know we need to address, but then we're just not looking at the whole sort of holistic kind of strategic view about how we address that. We do a lot of initiative-itis in this country, small pots of money, small bits of initiatives to try and incentivise certain behaviours, but then it doesn't look at the piece in the round, which is why I wanted to mention everything from the sort of Jim O'Neill review to the Gordon Brown review to the work David Blunkett's doing to the Green Paper. All these things we're weaving into one sort of bigger agenda to answer some of those questions, rather than, I think, as I say, just the odd little initiative here or there, which in the end often doesn't really amount to more than the sum of the parts, does it?
Exactly that. It may be that that's all you want to say about this next question. How would a Labour government maximise well-being at work to drive equity, innovation and productivity? The pulling together in a sort of goals-driven way of those different interests and departments. But is there anything else you'd like to say on that?
No, I mean, look, I think obviously health and well-being. I mean, we talk about this at the Shadow Cabinet quite a lot. When you talk about the productivity challenges of this country, you cannot separate that from having a healthy, happy workforce. You know, as well, if people are off sick or unable to work or unhappy at work, or that is an economic question. They are part of a productive. People are, workers are obviously a key part of a productive economy. So that's why you have to invest in health and well-being and preventative services, mental health as well, and all of those sorts of things. We see that as a critical part of our economic story as much as our public service story and narrative. So I think, maybe COVID did offer a sort of period of time where people reflected on the nature of their work and what was important and what wasn't, and we've seen a lot of people leave the workforce during that time, and that's now a big problem for our economy, that we've seen so many older people over the age of 50 leaving the workforce. So if people don't need to work, then they don't sort of have to work. So it has to be part of your economic story.
So maybe that's the particular way in which you align these different, these economic, innovation, tech, social, and health interests.
Yeah, because they're all part of the same sides of the same coin.
There's some fantastic ones coming through there.
Can you make them a bit easier?
Yeah. I like it. But there's a big one and a little one.
Okay, go on then.
So do you think that the DCMS needs rebranding? We've and do voters understand what the department does as well as its focus? And perhaps an example, should there be a Minister for AI, implementation and human wellbeing?
I mean, I definitely think DCMS probably needs a bit of a rebranding. I mean, it's lovely and it's great. It's such a broad area. But I think just this week alone, I'm dealing with the chairman of the BBC Trust fallout. The sort of collapse or near collapse of various football clubs, speaking at a massive creative industries conference this morning, and I'm just going through my diary in my head, the advertising sort of sector, the online safety bill, which we just sort of finalised at the back end of next week, and then talking about the future of work with you guys. I mean, it's quite a major sort of set of different agendas. But yes, you are seen as being the culture secretary or the shadow culture secretary, and someone who sort of goes along to the BAFTAs and football matches, which I do and I do enjoy. But it is the department of jobs of the future, and it's a big economic department. It's not seen as that in government, in Parliament, in the media, let alone. I mean, I don't think probably most ordinary members of the public would be able to name for you any more than 2 departments anyway in government. But so I think that there is a need to do that.
And also perhaps think about it in terms of national and local, what can be hived up that way as well.
Well, we've got a big agenda for devolution. I mean, Keir Starmer talks about being the first Prime Minister to win power in order to give it away, and I think a lot of this work can be done locally and regionally. Are you being wound up now? Yeah. I never know the time for these things either.
Nor me, and I may need to be.
You do.
Stopped. That's right. It sounds like there may be time for one more question.
Okay, I'll be quick.
Or are we going to? Perhaps we haven't had one from the audience yet, so perhaps taking one from the audience. This lady in the green jacket.
From the Metaverse Institute. So actually, a lot of the work of the future will taking place in the metaverse in the next 5-10 years. So we see lots of different national governments, say China, South Korea, Japan, UAE, and many others, developing their national strategies for different technologies, say quantum computing, AI, chips, coming together to form the next generation of the internet. So I wonder if the Labour government might be thinking about a really exciting national strategy for the metaverse to really put us as a global leader for metaverse for the next 10 years.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a great point to sort of finish. You're absolutely right, and it's something I say quite often sort of internally, in politics, in policy terms. As politicians, we're often on the sort of zeitgeist of 10 years ago. So we're all like, let's just get AI into every speech that we do. And it's like, no, everyone's off AI now. And in the real world, we're sort of on how AI merges with all the other technologies and takes us to the next leap forward. So yes, I think we should aim to do that. Whether we've got the know-how is a whole other thing, but hopefully that's something we can work together. Yes, that would be fantastic. Absolutely. Yeah, it'd be great.
Thank you. Thank you so much for a fantastic
It's a pleasure.
discussion. Back to Jim. Thank you.